It'll be one of the great ballrooms anywhere in the world. It's about $300 million. That's an interior of the ballroom. And it's the highest level.
Have you raised the full $300 million needed to fund your ballroom? And how much specifically are you donating to this construction project?
I think $350 million.
200, 250, 300, 350. Do I hear 4? To be clear, we do not know what the true cost is and why it keeps going up. We basically have no idea about any of this. And we have, of course, no reason to take the White House at its word. Democratic senators are demanding answers. A group of them are out with a letter to the National Park Service, as well as the trust that is collecting funds from the donors to the construction, accusing Trump of misleading the public about the scope and cost of the project. Senators want to know specifically, quote, when the project began, were trust officials under the impression it would cost $200 million, and, quote, when did trust officials become aware the project would cost $300 million and involve the complete destruction of the East Wing? That trust, the trust for the National Mall, is actually facing quite a few questions. One case we know a little more about, that's Alphabet, the company that owns Google. So we know they donated $22 million to fund the ballroom, and get this, we know that because the money came as part of a settlement in Trump's lawsuit against the company. You see, Donald Trump sued a bunch of tech companies back right after that happened, in 2021, after they banned his accounts following his incitement.
All right, so what's happening right now in Washington is the kind of institutional crisis that should have everyone paying attention regardless of their politics. We're talking about President Trump's entire legal defense operation collapsing in real time. Multiple senior attorneys resigning mid-trial, judges threatening sanctions for misconduct, Congress calling emergency hearings, and Trump reportedly furious and scrambling to figure out how to defend himself when his own lawyers are abandoning him. This isn't normal political drama. This is a fundamental breakdown of how legal representation is supposed to work. When lawyers quit mid-trial, when they walk away from a client in the middle of court proceedings, that's a sign that something has gone terribly wrong. Either the client is refusing to follow their advice, or the client is asking them to do things that will violate ethical rules, or the situation has become so legally untenable that the lawyers can't continue representing the client without destroying their own careers and reputations. And based on the reporting, all three of those factors are probably at play with Trump right now. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust headlines anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Of a deadly and violent insurrection on January 6th that resulted in many injuries and multiple deaths. And once Trump became president again, he realized he could just bully his way into enormous payments from a who's who of companies that have a lot of business before the U.S. So Alphabet, which owns YouTube, which kicked Trump off, settled with Trump for $22 million, and Meta, formerly Facebook, agreed to pay $22 million to fund Trump's future presidential library. And Elon Musk's X settled for $10 million, much of which went to Trump directly, per the Wall Street Journal. Trump also sued a number of media companies and got settlements. Disney and Paramount both donated about $15 million to Trump's library to settle lawsuits after the election.
According to Players Unlimited Media, reporting from October 7th, 3 senior Trump attorneys resigned within the same week. That's not a coincidence. That's not just one lawyer having a personal issue or a scheduling conflict. That's coordinated. That's multiple lawyers all reaching the same conclusion at the same time, that they can't continue representing Trump. And the trigger, according to the reporting, was a judge accusing the defense of disrespect for legal procedure and threatening sanctions for misconduct. So Trump's lawyers were apparently engaging in behavior that crossed ethical lines, behavior that made the judge angry enough to threaten penalties. And when that happened, when the judge made it clear that continuing down that path could result in professional sanctions, Trump's lawyers decided they'd rather quit than continue, because professional sanctions can destroy a legal career. They can result in disbarment, fines, reputational damage that makes it impossible to practice law. So Trump's lawyers looked at the situation and concluded that protecting Trump wasn't worth risking their own professional futures. And Trump was reportedly visibly furious in court. Can you imagine? Your lawyers are quitting mid-trial. The judge is threatening sanctions. Your legal strategy is falling apart in front of everyone. And you're sitting there in the courtroom watching it happen with nothing you can do about it in that moment. That's humiliating. That's the kind of thing that undermines your entire position, because it makes you look weak and out of control. And it sends a terrible message to other potential lawyers. If Trump can't keep his legal team together, if experienced attorneys are walking away mid-trial, why would any other competent lawyer want to take on Trump as a client? The answer is, they probably don't. which means Trump is going to have an increasingly hard time finding quality legal representation. He's going to be left with bottom-tier lawyers who are desperate for attention or who are true believers willing to sacrifice their careers for Trump. And that's not the kind of legal team that wins cases. But the courtroom collapse is only part of the story, because Congress has now gotten involved in a major way. According to multiple reports, lawmakers are calling for emergency hearings to investigate what they're calling misconduct and breakdowns in the administration's legal strategy. This is bipartisan. It's not just Democrats trying to score political points. Republicans are also raising concerns about whether Trump's legal operations have violated constitutional or judicial protocols, and Congress is demanding sworn testimony from Justice Department officials to get to the bottom of what's happening. That's significant. When Congress starts demanding sworn testimony about the president's legal operations, that's oversight ramping up to a serious level. That's Congress saying, we think there might be constitutional violations happening, and we need to investigate. And if DOJ officials are forced to testify under oath about Trump's legal strategies and the mass resignations, who knows what might come out? Maybe they'll reveal that Trump was asking lawyers to do illegal things. Maybe they'll reveal that there's a pattern of obstruction across multiple cases. Maybe they'll provide evidence that Trump is using the legal system to punish political opponents rather than to seek justice. According to Law and Crime reporting from October 16th, there's already an emergency hearing scheduled about the Trump administration allegedly ignoring prior restraining orders related to mass federal layoffs. So we have judges issuing restraining orders saying Trump can't fire certain federal workers, and Trump's administration apparently just ignoring those orders and firing people anyway. That's contempt of court, that's defying judicial authority, and it's creating a constitutional crisis, because if the executive branch can simply ignore court orders, then the judicial branch has no power, the separation of powers breaks down, and Congress is understandably concerned about that, because if Trump can ignore court orders, what else can he ignore? Can he ignore congressional subpoenas? Can he ignore laws he doesn't like? Where's the limit on executive power if courts can't enforce their own orders? Yahoo News reported on October 14th that congressional Democrats are warning of criminal consequences if Trump's DOJ continues what they're calling illegal federal actions amid shutdown-related firings. They're citing a pattern of obstruction across multiple agencies. So this isn't just about one case or one set of lawyers quitting. This is about a systematic pattern of Trump's administration ignoring legal constraints, defying court orders, and engaging in conduct that Congress views as potentially criminal. And now Congress is flexing its oversight muscles. They're saying, we've been watching this unfold, we've been documenting these violations, and now we're going to hold hearings and force people to testify under oath about what's really happening. That's the kind of institutional confrontation that can bring down presidencies. Because once Congress starts investigating seriously, once they start putting people under oath and compelling testimony, secrets come out, cover-ups fall apart, and presidents who've been operating outside the law suddenly face real accountability. So yeah, this is massive. This is a multi-front crisis for Trump. His legal team is collapsing, courts are threatening sanctions, and Congress is launching emergency investigations. Let's break down what's really happening and what it means. Okay. So let's dig into why Trump's legal team is collapsing and what that tells us about the underlying legal and ethical problems Trump is facing. When lawyers resign from a case, especially mid-trial, there are usually only a few possible reasons. First, the client might not be paying them. Lawyers have a right to withdraw if they're not getting compensated for their work. And Trump has a well-documented history of not paying his lawyers, so that's always a possibility. But typically when lawyers quit over money, they do it quietly through proper court procedures. They don't make a dramatic exit mid-trial. They file motions to withdraw and work out transition periods. So the fact that 3 senior attorneys all resign within the same week suggests something more urgent and more serious than a payment dispute. Second, lawyers can withdraw when the client refuses to follow their advice or insists on pursuing a strategy that the lawyers believe is legally unsound. Every client has the right to make their own decisions about their case, but lawyers also have professional obligations. If a client is insisting on doing something that the lawyer believes is frivolous or that violates court rules, the lawyer can't continue representing them without potentially facing sanctions themselves. And based on what we know about Trump, this is probably a major factor. Trump reportedly doesn't like to listen to legal advice. He has his own ideas about how cases should be handled, often based on political considerations rather than legal merit. And when his lawyers tell him that his ideas won't work or will get them in trouble, he apparently ignores them and does what he wants anyway. That puts lawyers in an impossible position. They can't control their client, but they're responsible for what happens in court, so eventually they reach a breaking point and quit. Third, lawyers have to withdraw if continuing to represent the client would require them to engage in conduct that violates professional ethics rules. This is the most serious reason for withdrawal, and is probably the most relevant here. According to Players Unlimited Media, the judge accused Trump's defense of disrespect for legal procedure and threatened sanctions for misconduct. That suggests Trump's lawyers were doing things in court that crossed ethical lines. Maybe they were making frivolous arguments that waste the court's time. Maybe they were misrepresenting facts or law to the judge. Maybe they were failing to comply with court orders or discovery obligations. Whatever they were doing, it was serious enough that the judge felt compelled to threaten sanctions. And when a judge threatens sanctions, that's a huge red flag for lawyers. Because sanctions can include fines, referrals to state bar associations for disciplinary proceedings, and even findings of contempt that can result in jail time in extreme cases. So Trump's lawyers looked at that threat and decided they needed to get out before they became personally liable for Trump's misconduct. The pattern here is clear. Trump apparently insists on legal strategies that his lawyers know are improper. When the lawyers push back or try to restrain him, Trump overrides them and forces them to proceed anyway. Then when judges start threatening sanctions for the resulting misconduct, the lawyers realize they're being put in an impossible ethical position and they quit. And this cycle repeats. Trump has gone through multiple legal teams across his various cases because competent lawyers eventually reach the conclusion that representing Trump is career suicide. The only lawyers who stick around long term are either incompetent, desperate for attention, or so ideologically committed to Trump that they're willing to sacrifice their professional reputations. Now let's talk about the congressional response, because that's equally significant. Congress calling for emergency hearings about Trump's legal operations is not something that happens lightly. Congressional oversight of the executive branch is normal and expected, but emergency hearings suggest that Congress believes there's an urgent threat to constitutional governance that requires immediate attention, and based on the reporting, Congress is concerned about multiple issues. First, there's the question of whether Trump has been ignoring court orders. The Law and Crime report about Trump allegedly ignoring restraining orders related to federal layoffs is particularly concerning. When presidents ignore court orders, that's a direct assault on judicial authority and the rule of law. Presidents don't get to pick and choose which court orders to follow. If they disagree with the court order, they can appeal it. But while the order is in effect, they have to comply. If Trump is just ignoring orders he doesn't like, that's grounds for impeachment and potentially for contempt findings that could result in real consequences. Second, Congress is concerned about whether Trump has been using DOJ and federal legal resources for political purposes. The ABC News report from September about U.S. Attorney Eric Siebert being forced to resign after Trump demanded prosecutions of political opponents is a perfect example of this. U.S. attorneys are supposed to make prosecution decisions based on evidence and law, not based on political directives from the White House. When presidents try to use the Justice Department as a weapon against their political enemies, that's a fundamental violation of the rule of law, and Congress has a responsibility to investigate and stop that kind of abuse. So they're calling for sworn testimony from DOJ officials to find out exactly what Trump has been asking them to do and whether they've been complying with improper demands. Third, Congress is concerned about a pattern of obstruction across multiple agencies. The Yahoo News report about congressional Democrats warning of criminal consequences for illegal federal actions suggests that this isn't isolated to one department or one case. Multiple agencies across the federal government are apparently engaging in conduct that Congress views as illegal, and they're doing it at Trump's direction. Whether it's ignoring court orders, firing federal employees in violation of civil service protections, or misusing federal resources for political purposes, there's apparently a systematic pattern, and Congress is trying to document that pattern and hold people accountable. The bipartisan nature of the congressional concern is also noteworthy. When Republicans join Democrats in calling for investigations and emergency hearings, that tells you the situation is serious enough that even Trump's own party is worried. Republicans in Congress have generally been reluctant to challenge Trump because they're afraid of his base and they don't want to face primary challenges. But if Republican lawmakers are willing to support congressional investigations into Trump's legal operations, that means they've concluded that the constitutional violations are too serious to ignore. They're putting institutional interests ahead of partisan loyalty, at least in this instance. And that's significant because it suggests that Trump has lost some of the protective shield that Republican control of Congress has provided him. The specific allegation about ignoring restraining orders related to federal layoffs is worth examining more closely. During government shutdown fights and budget negotiations, Trump has apparently been trying to carry out mass firings of federal workers. Courts have issued restraining orders saying he can't do that without following proper procedures and without violating civil service protections. But according to Law and Crime, Trump's administration has been ignoring those orders and firing people anyway. That's created chaos across the federal workforce. Employees don't know if they still have jobs, agencies don't know who's authorized to work, and judges are furious that their orders are being defied. So now we have emergency hearings to address what amounts to a constitutional crisis where the executive branch is openly defying the judicial branch. The criminal consequences that Democrats are warning about are also significant. If Trump and his officials are knowingly violating court orders, that's criminal contempt. If they're engaging in obstruction of justice by interfering with investigations or destroying evidence, that's a federal crime. If they're misusing federal funds or resources for improper purposes, that could be theft or fraud. So when Democrats talk about criminal consequences, they're not being hyperbolic, they're pointing to specific statutes that appear to have been violated. And if Congress documents those violations through sworn testimony, that evidence can be referred to prosecutors for criminal charges. So Trump isn't just facing political embarrassment from these hearings, he's potentially facing criminal liability if the evidence shows he's been systematically violating laws and ignoring court orders. The Eric Siebert resignation is also revealing about Trump's approach to the Justice Department. Siebert was a U.S. attorney who apparently refused to carry out Trump's demand to prosecute political opponents, so Trump forced him out. That's exactly the kind of politicization of justice that should alarm everyone. U.S. attorneys are supposed to have independence to make prosecution decisions without political interference. When presidents fire U.S. attorneys for refusing to carry out improper prosecution demands, that destroys the independence and integrity of the justice system. And it's now being cited by Congress as evidence of systematic problems in how Trump is managing federal legal operations. If Congress can establish through testimony that Trump has been demanding politically motivated prosecutions and firing officials who refuse to comply, that's a serious abuse of power that could form the basis for impeachment articles. All right, let's break down what this legal and congressional crisis actually means going forward. Because at this point, you're probably wondering, okay, Trump's lawyers are quitting and Congress is investigating, but what are the real consequences? What happens next? And how does this affect Trump's ability to govern and defend himself? Let me give you 3 key takeaways. First, Trump's legal position across all his cases is getting dramatically worse because he can't maintain stable, competent legal representation. When your legal team is constantly turning over, when experienced lawyers keep quitting mid-case, you lose continuity and institutional knowledge. New lawyers have to get up to speed on complex cases. They have to review thousands of pages of documents. They have to learn the procedural history and understand what arguments have already been made. All of that takes time, and while new lawyers are getting up to speed, the cases keep moving forward. Deadlines still have to be met, hearings still happen, and if your lawyers aren't fully prepared because they just took over the case, you're at a huge disadvantage. Beyond the practical problems, the constant turnover also damages Trump's credibility with judges. When judges see a revolving door of lawyers, when they watch multiple attorneys quit mid-case, they start to question what's going on. They start to wonder whether the problem is the client rather than the lawyers. And judges talk to each other. They share information about difficult clients and problematic cases. So Trump's reputation in the legal community is getting worse and worse. And that makes it harder for him to get favorable treatment from judges who might otherwise give him the benefit of the doubt. Judges are less likely to grant continuances or extensions when they think the delays are the client's fault due to his inability to keep a legal team. They're less likely to believe Trump's arguments when they've seen previous lawyers make similar arguments and then quit when judges push back. So the legal team collapse isn't just creating immediate practical problems, it's creating long-term reputational damage that will hurt Trump in every legal proceeding going forward. And the talent pool of available lawyers continues to shrink. Every time a set of Trump lawyers quits, especially when it's mid-trial and over ethical concerns, other lawyers pay attention. Word spreads through the legal community, and competent lawyers who might have considered representing Trump decide it's not worth the risk. They see that Trump doesn't follow legal advice. They see that representing him can lead to judges threatening sanctions. They see that other lawyers have had their reputations damaged by association with Trump, and they decide to stay away. So Trump is left with an increasingly limited pool of potential lawyers. He's going to have to rely on less experienced attorneys, lawyers from smaller firms who are willing to take risks for the publicity, or ideological supporters who care more about the cause than about their careers. And that's a recipe for losing cases. Because in high-stakes litigation, lawyer quality matters enormously. And Trump is systematically driving away the highest quality lawyers. Second, the congressional emergency hearings are going to expose a lot of information that Trump would prefer to keep secret. When Congress holds hearings and compels sworn testimony from DOJ officials and other administration members, that testimony becomes public record. And people testifying under oath have to tell the truth or face perjury charges. So we're going to learn details about Trump's legal strategies, about demands he's made of Justice Department officials, about court orders that have been ignored, about the reasons lawyers have been quitting. All of that information is going to come out, and it's going to be used against Trump in multiple ways. First, it will be used politically. Democrats are going to take the most damaging revelations from the hearings and turn them into campaign ads. They're going to argue that Trump is lawless, that he ignores courts, that he tries to weaponize the Justice Department, and that even his own lawyers can't defend his conduct. That messaging is going to resonate with moderate voters who are concerned about constitutional norms and the rule of law. Second, the information from the hearings can be used in Trump's various legal cases. If DOJ officials testify under oath that Trump told them to ignore court orders or to take actions that violated laws, that testimony can be introduced as evidence in civil and criminal cases against Trump. It can be used to show consciousness of guilt, to establish patterns of behavior, to contradict Trump's own testimony or statements. So by forcing these hearings, Congress is essentially helping build legal cases against Trump, even if that's not their primary intention. Third, the hearings are going to increase pressure for impeachment. If the testimony reveals serious constitutional violations, if officials admit under oath that Trump ordered them to break laws or ignore court orders, Democrats are going to argue that impeachment is necessary. And even some Republicans might be forced to agree if the evidence is damning enough. We've already seen 2 Trump impeachments. A third one is not out of the question. If these hearings produce smoking gun evidence of abuse of power, the specific focus on ignoring court orders is particularly significant because that's such a clear-cut violation. You don't need to understand complex legal theories or parse ambiguous statutes. Either Trump complied with court orders or he didn't. And if testimony establishes that he knowingly violated restraining orders, that's grounds for contempt findings that could include real penalties. Judges could fine Trump personally. They could fine his administration. In extreme cases, they could even order Trump or his officials jailed for contempt until they comply with court orders. That's rare and unlikely, but it's within judicial power. And the fact that it's even being discussed shows how serious the situation has become. We're talking about potential direct confrontations between the judicial and executive branches with Congress as referee. That's a constitutional crisis by any definition. Third, this crisis reveals the fragility of institutional norms and the dangers of a president who doesn't respect legal constraints. For most of American history, presidents have generally complied with court orders, even when they disagree with them. They've generally respected the independence of the Justice Department, even when it meant their political enemies weren't prosecuted. They've generally worked with lawyers who advised them on legal boundaries rather than firing lawyers who told them no. These norms weren't enforced by law in most cases. They were enforced by shame, by fear of political consequences, by respect for institutions, and by basic decency. But Trump doesn't care about any of that. He's not ashamed when he violates norms. He doesn't fear political consequences because his base supports him no matter what. He has no respect for institutions that constrain his power. And he's demonstrated repeatedly that he has no sense of decency or propriety when it comes to using power. So we're in uncharted territory where a president is systematically testing every institutional constraint and finding that many of them don't actually work when the president just ignores them. Courts can issue orders, but if the president ignores them, what happens? Can courts actually enforce their orders against the president? The Constitution says the president has executive power and commands the military and federal agencies. So if the president orders those agencies to ignore court orders, who's going to stop him? Congress can hold hearings and document violations, but if the president's party protects him from impeachment, does that congressional oversight actually accomplish anything? These are the questions we're grappling with right now, and the answers aren't clear. The system was designed with the assumption that presidents would feel bound by norms and by shame. But when you have a president who feels no such constraints, the system starts to break down. The mass lawyer resignations are a symptom of this breakdown. Lawyers are officers of the court with professional ethical obligations. They can't just blindly follow client instructions when those instructions violate court rules or laws. So when Trump insists on strategies that violate those obligations, lawyers have to choose between their duty to their client and their duty to the legal system. And increasingly, Trump's lawyers are choosing the legal system. They're walking away from Trump rather than violating their professional ethics. That's good for the individual lawyers and for the integrity of the legal profession, but it's terrible for the functioning of our legal system because it means the president can't get adequate legal representation. And everyone, even people accused of serious crimes, deserves adequate legal representation. So we're in this perverse situation where Trump's own behavior is making it impossible for him to exercise his legal rights because no competent lawyer wants to represent him. So yeah, that's where we are. Trump's legal team is collapsing. Congress is holding emergency hearings, and we're watching a slow-motion institutional crisis unfold where the president is ignoring legal constraints and the other branches of government are struggling to figure out how to stop him. This is going to get worse before it gets better. More lawyers will quit. More hearings will happen. More violations will be documented. And eventually we'll reach a breaking point where either Trump is held accountable through impeachment or criminal prosecution, or we accept that presidents are effectively above the law. Those are the stakes.